So I recently read the book Same as Ever by Morgan Housel, and I want to talk a little bit about what I learned about developing foresight by looking back at history and specifically human psychology. So in a sort of famous question to Jeff Bezos, he was asked, what does he think is going to change in the upcoming years? And he came back and said, I think the more important question is what's not going to change. So if you look at Amazon, he really built it off of the principles of what's not ever going to change. He said that he knows that customers are always going to want things cheaper, they're always going to want things faster, they're always going to want things easier. It's a lot easier to look at what has never changed than to predict what the next big thing is going to be. You don't have to look back very far to see that people are really bad at predicting the future. In the 1940s, the president of IBM said that he never saw, or he didn't see a market for more than 5 computers in the entire world. And obviously he was wrong about that. But if he had just focused on what is never going to change, people are always going to want things to be, again, faster and more convenient, then he might have been able to see that the computer revolution was coming and wouldn't be on record with such a bad prediction. In order to develop foresight, we really need to focus on hindsight first. And there's no easier thing to focus on than human psychology, because human psychology has not changed for thousands of years and probably won't change for thousands of more years. The first lesson that I took away about developing foresight is that people underestimate what they don't know. Everyone thinks that they've basically got everything under control, but we really don't. Just look at kids, for example. So whenever we were kids, it was really easy to just kind of ignore everything that was going on, but you weren't really ignoring it. You didn't really see it. Your worldview and your experiences were so small that you just didn't even think about all the things that could possibly go wrong. Well, whenever we're older, we have a lot more life experiences to pull off of, and now it's easier to develop predictions and see the risks in things. Well, the problem is that we think we know more than we do. So a lot of times, adults, myself included, we'll think that we thought of everything in the world and that risk literally cannot exist, but that's actually whenever risk exists the most. Whenever you think you've thought of everything, risk is what's left over. And oftentimes that's what really throws people off guard. I mean, just look at the biggest news events and the biggest risks in the world. I mean, 2008 financial crisis, for one. They occur whenever people don't see them coming. So if people have time to prepare, then it's no longer a risk and it's not going to make such a big impact. It's the small probability things that are literally outside of what you can even perceive. It's the black swan that Nassim Nicholas Taleb talks about in his famous book. So the solution here is to invest in preparedness and not prediction. So Morgan Housel uses an example of the state of California. They know that an earthquake is going to happen at some point. The thing is, they don't know when it will be or how strong it will be. So they build up the buildings with strong foundations, and they have the personnel on standby, so that way whenever it does happen, they're ready to respond to it. Well, we can do the same thing in our lives. We don't need to predict when the next earthquake is, when the next great thing is, or when the next terrible thing is. Instead, if we just invest in being prepared for whenever it does come along, then I think we'll be a lot better off. So this next one is somewhat related to the last, and it's that calm plants the seeds of crazy. Whenever things are going the best, they're actually most prone to turn around and go terribly. And it's like I was talking about just a second ago, how whenever we're not prepared for something, whenever we're not thinking about a risk, that's actually whenever it's most likely to make a big impact. And so during calm times, we oftentimes become complacent. And you could really see this in the COVID-19 pandemic. People in the early 1900s and the late 1800s faced infectious diseases all the time that could have killed them. It was a common thing to have pandemics sweep through your town or your city. While in recent years, I talk, the last century basically, that's largely been a thing of the past because of medical advances. Well, what that led to is that people were complacent, and whenever COVID-19 came along, people were also skeptic. And that led to it being a huge global pandemic that basically shut down the world. And it came as such a huge surprise because we had this long period where it wasn't a thing at all. So that calm period planted the seed for the crazy period that was COVID-19. So next is that incentives skew judgment. And this has been the way that things have always been. People respond to incentives, not information. So if you want to change somebody's mind, well, you can use incentives. But if you want to understand why people think the way they do, well, uncover the incentives because they're probably there. In 1923, there was a man who wanted to create a magazine, but he was, I think, tired of all of the fake stories out there. So he wanted to make this magazine purely on things that were fact. Once he started to create this, he realized that it's actually really hard to come across things that are cut and dry, 100% facts. Most things out there are actually opinion. In fact, he had one quote here: "Show me a man who thinks he is objective, and I'll show you a man who is deceiving himself." If things in the world are getting really crazy and out of control, then you just need to follow the incentives back to figure out exactly why that's happening, because there's always some incentives behind it. And for ourselves, it even blinds us to our own actions. So it's always easier to look at other people and tell what the incentives are. But whenever it's ourselves, it's like especially hard to figure it out. So a useful thought exercise is to look at our own beliefs and think, okay, which of these would change if the incentives changed? I think you can find out a lot about yourself by doing that. The next thing is that emotions don't make it on spreadsheets. You can't take the emotions of a human, the hormones of a human, and crunch them into a number. So I think this is one of the root causes of economics, the economic predictions, which are very often wrong, and I don't think that's any secret. And it's funny that some of the most important things are often ones that can't be turned into numbers. So it's not just that you can't turn human emotions into numbers, it's that some of those are the most important things and they literally can't be. Going back to another Jeff Bezos quote here, he said that whenever the anecdotes and the data disagrees, you should usually follow the anecdotes because they're more often right. It's kind of funny to think that way because I think we're trained in today's society to sort of follow the facts. And we have a lot of faith in scientists, and we totally should. A lot of great things have come from scientific innovation. But when it comes down to it, it can be better a lot of times to just focus on the basics and what we know to be true through history instead of following the data all the time.